Hello, everyone. How's it going? So, very interesting game awards. Just let me know if you can all hear me. Welcome, the Giga Slayer, Dima, PB, JJ Dundas, Josiah. Just let me know if the audio is coming through all right. Okay, you can hear me. So, welcome, Chris, Doomfist. Okay, so very interesting game awards. First of all, I have to say I'm very excited for a little bit of a teaser for the new Ueda game. For people who haven't played any of the Ueda games, that's Eco, Shadow of the Colossus, and The Last Guardian. Eco is actually the game which inspired Miyazaki to go into game design, and all three of those games are fantastic. I would highly recommend. So I'm very excited to see his next one. And then also the news that Kamiya is back with a new studio. But that's all good news. But we're going to forget about that for now. We're focusing on Nightreign. So, where do we start? We have the Bandai website. So basically what it seems like, for those of you who haven't been obsessively trying to figure out what's going on here, they call it a co-op action survival game. It seems like basically the idea is there are 8 sort of starting characters, kind of in the manner of like a hero shooter. It's a predetermined character with some amount of backstory, although it may be minimal. And you get to choose one of these, so there's not really, you don't get to design your character exactly, although it seems like there are cosmetic things. And you get thrust into this world. You can play solo or in a squad, and you just have to sort of survive 3 nights. And it seems like it's pretty short. Sounds like it's about 10 minutes per day, so it's a quick sort of session. And in those days you can go around, find different upgrades. Some of those upgrades will follow through sessions, so in kind of like a roguelite form. You can get something which will, I don't know, upgrade your attack power, let's say, and then the next session that you play, that will transfer over. The map, it has some randomized element to it, so it's not necessarily the same map each time. And also the bosses there seems to be some variety there, so you're not playing the same bosses each time. So, and the place is called Limveld, clearly based off of Limgrave. So the question that I think for all the lore people is like, well, what are we looking at? What is this thing? What is this thing? So the director is Junya Ishizaki. He was the battle director for Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree. He's been with FromSoft since Dark Souls. He's been there for a long time. He was, battle director, is one of the top directors for Elden Ring. So Elden Ring, we had Hidetaka Miyazaki director, we had Tanimura was co-director, we have a programming director, gameplay directors, level design, system design, all the art stuff, and of course lead programmers and so on. and then battle director is here. So this is one of the top devs for Elden Ring. And basically what it sounds like is that, he brought this concept to Miyazaki, and Miyazaki gave it the green light. He said he was a little bit involved in that initial concept phase of the game, but after that, he gave full reign to Ishizaki. So this is an Ishizaki game. It's not Miyazaki. It is FromSoft and Bandai, but it's not. Miyazaki probably had some influence at the very beginning. It's also not based on George R. R. Martin's story. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means. It's roguelite, but with Fortnite Storm thing. Yeah, so one of the aspects of it is that this thing called the Night's Tide sort of shrinks the map, like Fortnite does with a Battle Royale. But basically the wherever the confines of the space that you can explore gets smaller as it goes on. So what exactly is this? Well, I think that the way to think about it is this. Miyazaki became president of From Software, right? Just a little bit of Miyazaki's story, right? He goes to college for basically sociology. He gets an IT job. No real experience with video games. He liked tabletops when he was a kid. And then a friend of his showed him Eco, and that inspired him to suddenly go into game design. He got a job with From Software, and instantly incredible career trajectory, shooting upwards. He gets to direct Armored Core 4 and For Answer, and then Demon Souls, all within a few years of joining. Is an unbelievable sort of rise to power. So Demon Souls is kind of seen as a maybe failed project. He takes it over. It releases in 2009, and it's totally unexpected success. They didn't even plan to release it in the States at first. And then it just got it was so massively popular, sold millions, that they had to partner with Atlas to release it in the West. And then they partner with Bandai, and basically doing a kind of sequel to Demon Souls, not within the same universe, which we'll get to. But they wanted to recreate Demon Souls, do it better, little bigger budget, and then of course Dark Souls becomes a massive hit as well, still with more of a cult kind of following. And then there's sequels. There's Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3. You get Bloodborne, and that also gets massive success. There was Déraciné, which no one played because no one likes VR. And then there was Sekiro, and that was a huge success, and it got Game of the Year. And then we get to Elden Ring, and it's just success after success after success, and this guy seems like he can't miss. And I'm speaking purely, I'm not talking about the quality of those games, I'm just speaking from a success perspective, right? These just sell massively, these games. And so I think it's right after Bloodborne, around that time, he is named president of the company. And now what he starts to do is he starts putting co-directors in place. So he starts promoting people from within the company to take on these co-director positions. For example, Tanimura being co-director of Elden Ring, with Sekiro, I don't remember the guy's name, and also with Armored Core. um, sort of delegating these games. So it's not just, he's the sort of front line in how successful his games have been doing the Demon Souls, Dark Souls, etc. But as he becomes CEO and as he's rising through the company, he starts sort of delegating out, and at the same time you also see, from Demon Souls onward, all they were really doing was Souls and Souls-like stuff, right? Including Bloodborne and Sekiro. And then you start to see that branch out a bit again, because FromSoft, before Miyazaki was there, they had a couple series. They had Armored Core, they had Kingsfield, they had Tenchu. And Demon Souls and all the Souls stuff kind of emerged out of Kingsfield, but that's a very different thing. It's, first person. Tenchu sort of became Sekiro, and then Armored Core gets a sequel. And now you see it kind of branching out. The company has expanded quite considerably. There's a lot more devs working on it now. And I think basically what you get is both an expansion and division where you've got multiple teams working on different projects, and he's sort of delegating these, promoting people from within the company to take directorial positions for these different projects. So going from, this attitude of promoting from within, you have the battle director of Elden Ring. Elden Ring is a huge success. People really like the combat in it. And the battle director comes to Miyazaki and says, hey, I want a project. I want to do something. And so here you go. This is your new project. So I think for people who are, let's say, really into Elden Ring's style of game, this may be a far reach, because this is clearly a totally different genre of game. This is not going to be anything like playing Elden Ring, right? This is going to be more, I don't know exactly what it will be like, but it will be less like Elden Ring and more like other multiplayer games out there. Does that mean it will be bad? No, I don't think so. And I feel like FromSoft has generated enough credibility that, even if this doesn't sound like the type of genre of game you would be interested in, well, normally I would not play a game like this, or I'd be less inclined to, but I put some stock in their reputation and in their credibility, and so I'll wait and see. Personally, I mean, this to me is a good sign, because it means that they are trying to experiment and do different things. I would love to see FromSoft. I think they're a good company. They have a good, I have my own problems with some of the design decisions that have been made over the years, but they're a good and reliable company. They have good art direction. They have good design direction. I was just recently going back to Dark Souls 3 and playing some, and it's amazing how many little things have been drastically improved in Elden Ring that I just sort of forgot about. I sort of trust them as a company certainly more than I do basically any other company out there. And that's not just about Miyazaki. I mean, Miyazaki is a gem, but the company as a whole, I think, there's a lot of talented devs in there. Certainly a lot of talented art design. So, I'm interested. I will wait and see. I doubt it will be terrible. It may end up being kind of mediocre. but I don't think it's going to be terrible. I don't think it's going to be a flop. Just because I trust in FromSoft essentially. Okay, so but the big question is the sort of the lore aspect, and what is going on there? How canonical is this? So, in an interview, Junya Ishizaki, the director, says, "We'd like fans to think of Nightreign as an Elden Ring spin-off, first and foremost. The story is completely separate and parallel to the world of Elden Rings. If you had to tie it in some way, we had the events of the Shattering in the original game. After the events of the Shattering, this is a completely separate branch of the Elden Ring story. We didn't want to encroach on that story of Elden Ring too much. We wanted it to coexist. So he is definitely highlighting its separation from Elden Ring's story. He doesn't want this to be. This is not like a DLC. This is not something which is going to figure closely into the base game and Shadow of the Erdtree's story. However, this is, as Bandai says, it is a standalone adventure within the Elden Ring universe. It is called Elden Ring. So how do we make sense of that? And of course, we'll look at the trailer. There's clearly assets from Dark Souls, and it was said somewhere, I can't remember exactly where. Oh yeah, and by the way, Ishizaki, he was a level designer on Dark Souls, and level designer and battle designer on Bloodborne. I don't remember exactly where it was said, but it isn't just asset reuse. These are enemies from Dark Souls. So when we see the Nameless King in here, that is literally the Nameless King. At least that's the impression that I get. It's not just a new enemy with sort of reusing that asset in the way that, I mean, they've always reused assets. For example, the crabs is the first thing that come to mind. Those first appeared in Dark Souls 3. They're basically ported over one-to-one in Elden Ring. There's a few other enemies like that, usually minor things. And asset reuse, it's a really convenient way, especially when you're iterating, right? Because you can look at the Souls-like genre as being it's an iterative process. They are always expanding and trying to solve problems and try out new things. You see a lot of the same elements. On a simple mechanical level, things like lock-on, which really, if you go back and play the older games, lock-on is just not as good. That is something that they have improved consistently over time. It's much, much better in Elden Ring. And then in larger sort of concepts, like the idea of your souls dropping where you die and sort of incentivizing you to go and retrieve them, and therefore put you in this cycle of, trying again and again at something. So in that context, well, okay. Let's see, where do I want to start here? I think let me start with this. I think first, there's going to be a lot of people that are incentivized to say that this is more canonical or less canonical based on sort of pre-existing biases. So you should be suspicious of anything that I say, because it would be in my best interest if this were canon, because then I would have all sorts of new content to talk about. Hopefully my lack of consistency in uploading videos gives me a bit more credibility in being able to speak about this objectively. But probably most lore hunters will be incentivized, and I don't mean this in a dishonest way, but just be incentivized to want to think of it as canonical, because then that means there's all this extra stuff to talk about, right? Um, then I think you also have a lot of other people who want Elden Ring to be kind of this special thing, and this might seem like it's kind of sullying it. It's making it kind of, it seems kind of corporate, and it's a cash grab and this sort of thing, and you just want to dismiss it and forget about it. Um, I would say, there's maybe a middle ground between those. I don't think of, a cash grab is, when you say cash grab, it's sort of not a very descriptive term. That's basically just a derogatory way of saying, like, well, they're trying to make money, which is obviously true. That's what a business should be doing. I don't think it doesn't seem to me like a cash grab, something like this, because normally something like that, if you saw Bandai, like, separately from FromSoft, taking the Elden Ring IP and doing something with it, the Demon Souls remake to me seems more like that, where you've got the people that basically own the IP, doing something with it that is sort of cheap. This is, to me, this is someone within the company who had a cool idea. Well, we'll see how cool the idea is. Maybe it's not that cool, but they had an idea for gameplay, right? They're a gameplay designer. This is not the lore guy, right? This is level design and battle director, combat designer kind of person. He had an idea for gameplay. He comes to Miyazaki, he says, I got a cool idea. Can we reuse all of this stuff that we've built? We've built this, like, map generation tool for Elden Ring. We have all this data from PvP and also from PvE about how players, what parts they like. We've done all this balancing work. Why not just reuse that rather than, like, start from scratch and make a new game? Can we just reuse all this stuff? And we can reuse the IP. Now, they could have theoretically sort of reused that stuff and made minor changes and just call it something else. They didn't have to call it Elden Ring. So you could see that maybe as the cash grab part. Like, it's why not just make a completely new IP? If you're making a completely different game, why call it Elden Ring? Just call it something else. Call it Eternal Ring. They already had that IP a long time ago in FromSoft. Make it a completely new game. So you could see that as being more sort of skeevy. To me, that doesn't really bother me. To me, what matters is the execution of it. So if it's a bad game, then it's a bad game, and if it's a good game, it's a good game. But what does this imply for the lore? So I want to talk about Michael Moorcock. So in one of the many interviews that Hidetaka Miyazaki, where he was talking about Elden Ring, I think even before the game came out, he said that one of the inspirations for Elden Ring was the Eternal Champion series of novels, along with other things like, RuneQuest, and so some other sources of influence. Obviously, there's so many different sources of influence in Elden Ring. There's, Norse myths and the Abrahamic myths and Japanese myths and bits of Lord of the Rings, alchemy, all sorts of different things, right? So, but one of these things was the Eternal Champion. I never heard of that. And so I started to read some of the Eternal Champion novels. So this guy Michael Moorcock, he was a big writer, particularly I think in the 80s and 90s. He wrote a whole bunch of different stories, some science fiction, some fantasy, some just sort of more plain kind of thriller dramas, all sorts of different genres. Um, but his biggest series was the Elric of Melniboné series. This is about a character called Elric, um, who famously wears this black dragon helmet. Find a good picture of him. He was an albino with this sort of skullish face and red eyes, and he has this black dragon helmet. There we go. There's a good rendition of it. So this was a hugely popular series of Michael Moorcock's. Elric is basically, he's part of this race called the Melnibonéans. Sorry, my sinuses are a little clogged. I can't pronounce that properly. And he's basically the emperor. He inherits the throne. And the Melnibonéans are sort of very cruel and callous and not very sympathetic race. But Elric is kind of, he's a bit of a different character. He's not exactly a nice person, but he actually cares what it means to rule. He actually cares about ruling like a good leader, and so he basically goes on all these adventures, starting with this quest to basically figure out what it means to be a good ruler, and then it goes in all sorts of crazy directions. There are these two magical rune swords. His one is called Stormbringer, and it's got a brother called Mournblade. This is exactly. He is the original dark brooding prince. This is kind of the archetypal dark fantasy series. It wasn't the only one or even the first one of that kind of genre, but it maybe was the most famous and the most influential, was the Elric series. Now, at a certain point in Moorcock's life, he decided that he wanted to, well, the way he describes it is that he had all these different stories and he was writing about all these different characters, and basically he found that he was writing about the same kind of characters again and again and again. And he just thought, well, apart from anything else, it's just more interesting if that actually is the same character, rather than it just being sort of, I'm just writing the same archetype over and over again. It's more interesting if you can add more, you can contextualize that character. And so he came up with this idea of the Eternal Champion. So the Eternal Champion, the basic premise is that all of these different stories that he wrote, whether they're science fiction and fantasy, all these different worlds, all take place in this grand multiverse. And I think he actually coined the term multiverse, at least in the context of like media. And so he came up with this idea of the multiverse, where all of these characters are sort of, they exist in their own worlds. These worlds are almost entirely separate from each other, but there is this connection. And basically the idea with the multiverse is that the multiverse is this grand game, this grand battle between the forces of law and chaos, basically order and chaos. This is like this enormous cosmic battle that's taking place. And if either one wins, it will mean the end of all existence. Because if you have too much law, then everything stultifies and it just becomes, nothing can change, and it just becomes basically frozen, and nothing can exist anymore. And then if you have too much chaos, sort of everything becomes torn apart, and there's no consistency, there's no reliability. And so either one winning means the destruction of everything. And basically every story, every world within this is some manifestation of this battle between law and chaos. And the idea is it needs to go towards balance. So sometimes, a world might be too chaotic and then you need to impose some law. But sometimes the world might be too lawful, it might be too orderly, and you need to impose some chaos. You need to bring some chaos into it. So the Eternal Champion is this sort of like a manifestation of this need for balance, this need for the cosmic balance of the multiverse. And the Eternal Champion is basically a character. He's basically the protagonist of every story that Moorcock wrote. That in every world, this Eternal Champion is trying to bring balance to the world in some way. And sometimes, sometimes that seems like a nice thing. Sometimes it's a little bit more, it's a little darker, depending on the state of the world and all the context of that world. But basically, the idea is that this Eternal Champion is the same character throughout all of these different universes. That not necessarily that they even remember who they are, but it's something like, that their soul is sort of reflected across all of these different universes. And so Elric is also John Dacre from some of Moorcock's other novels. He's also Prince Coram and Arakosa and all these different characters. They are the same sort of person, in the way that if you've ever seen Doctor Who, the different doctors are all the same person, even though they have different personalities. They may even be different sexes. Like, they're different people in a way, but they're kind of the same person. And there are stories in which this becomes more relevant, where the Eternal Champion has these recollections. So the story that kind of spawned this out is called The Eternal Champion, and this is where his idea came from. And it's this guy, it's John Dacre, who is another one of Moorcock's characters, sort of falling asleep and starting to have all these memories of being called different names, including like Elric. And then he sort of wakes up as Arakosa, and he almost forgets everything else. He forgets who he was. It's like a dream almost. So they're sort of connected, but not really doing any kind of there's no like real interaction in most of the stories. There's no real interaction between these different worlds. It's just this sort of vague connection, because they are totally separate worlds. But there's just this thing in the background, kind of this battle between law and chaos, and this sense that the Eternal Champion is the same person, whatever that means, even though he may not remember anything about those previous lives. And it just sort of gives a little bit of extra sort of interesting context to that character. And then there are a few stories where it does become more relevant, where there are sort of traveling between universes. There's a race called the Eldren, not Elden, but the Eldren, who are basically like elves. They have managed to propagate throughout the multiverse, so they sort of appear in lots of different places. They're, in fact, the Melnibonéans are descendants of the Eldren. There's a really weird Elric novel where, the first few novels kind of start out pretty normal fantasy, dark fantasy, and then there's one where he gets picked up by this ship that sails the seas of fate, and he meets 3 other incarnations of the Eternal Champion, so 3 other versions of himself, and that they go backwards and forwards through time, and there's all sorts of weird stuff that goes on there. One fun extra little thing, which I'll just say about, I'll wrap this section up about the Eternal Champion, is that there is this place called Tanalorn, which many different characters in Moorcock's novels sort of search for. It's kind of like Avalon or Camelot. It's like this mythical city. And Tanalorn is very difficult to find for many people. It's kind of almost magically hidden. Elric actually finds it pretty easily, and it's sort of a resting place for the Eternal Champion. It's very tied to the Eternal Champion's duty. And this place exists in every universe. It's sort of like a kind of crossroads between universes. It's something that's both outside of the multiverse and within every universe, and it kind of exists outside of time, in every time, however you want to put it. And the fun thing about that is that Tanalorn is also called the Eternal City. So that's just a sort of fun little thing to tie in there. But the reason I'm bringing all this up is not to say that this is necessarily what is going on in Elden Ring, but you can see why, as an author, this idea of the multiverse would be appealing, because it basically gives you the opportunity to kind of get some extra context that makes the world seem bigger and more interesting, that makes the characters seem bigger and more interesting, but you can still keep them all separate because it's a different universe. Like, you know, unless you want to start writing a story where people are crossing between universes, and then you can do that if you want. But like, you can still just write a story that's totally separate from everything else, and just give it this background context where it feels bigger. It feels bigger than just the story that you wrote. So it's a very enticing idea for an author. And so I think that it's very possible that Elden Ring was initially designed with this concept in mind. And let me be clear about what I'm saying. I'm not necessarily saying that Elden Ring exists in a multiverse, but I'm saying what I am saying is that I think that it's possible that they designed it with this idea that, well, maybe there is a larger sort of picture, which we don't need to you know, throw previous IPs or future IPs in here, but that this is maybe part of a larger picture, just that intimation, right? That's why, you know, it's the lands between. It's this place where it's sort of a physical place, but it's kind of magically removed from the rest of the world. You get all sorts of, you know, odd things with different worlds. You know, different players can be summoned into your world, and they're kind of going on their own adventure, and there's things going on with time and places beyond time. So I think it's very possible that was part of the context of designing Elden Ring's story in the first place, was that this is something where, you know, the world outside the world that we're exploring is bigger and more mysterious than you could imagine. Now, I think I should say one thing about multiverses, because this is like sort of the trend now, and you know, starting with Marvel, and there's a lot of pitfalls to the multiverse idea. One thing that often happens is you can easily totally destroy the stakes for any story that's set within that multiverse, right? So, for example, you write a story, you know, your Scooby Gang gets together and fights the bad guy, boom, story's done. Now you have another story which is totally different, set somewhere else, and it now, because you're following that first story, you need to make it bigger, you need to make it more impressive, and so your Scooby Gang has even crazier powers, and the bad guy is now, instead of maybe destroying the world, he's destroying the galaxy, right? And you need to make it a bigger threat. And then that keeps on going. That kind of snowballs, and you got to keep on making things bigger and bigger and bigger until It's not just the galaxy, it's the universe. And then not just the universe, it's every universe and every timeline. And you just sort of expand and expand and expand. And then the problem is like, well, now retroactively, that first story that you did seems really kind of lame because, well, somewhere else in the universe, there's a way bigger battle going on. So all of those sacrifices and trials that those characters that you liked in the first story, all the things that they went through feel way less impactful. So that's one problem that you run into with multiverses. The other big problem that you run into with multiverses is if it's an infinite multiverse, that basically means that nothing matters, right? Because no matter what you do, no matter what any of the characters do, if they win or if they lose, there's an infinite number of universes where the opposite happens. It doesn't affect anything because if it's infinite, that means that every possibility happens. Therefore, all we're doing is just looking at one permutation, and nothing. The outcome doesn't really matter because all the outcomes have happened. So infinite multiverses, infinite timelines. Oh, I think that inherently destroys the stakes in a story. But it doesn't necessarily have to be infinite. It doesn't have to be in the sense of like, the quantum event where, every time you make a decision, there's an alternate universe where you made the opposite decision, right? Infinitely meaningless. Exactly. Yeah. So with like Moorcock's multiverse, for example, it's not clear whether it's infinite. I would say it doesn't seem like it is, although I certainly have not read even most of his stories because there's just hundreds of them. That's why I thought Bioshock Infinite was so lame, pun intended. Yeah, exactly. Bioshock Infinite really screwed that up because of the infinite timeline problem. And there's lots of movies and books that do screw that problem. They do that badly. So there is I think a distinction between where it's explicitly an infinite universe with every possibility happens, that totally destroys the stakes, versus a more confined multiverse. And basically the way to make sure that stakes still matter is basically to treat a multiverse as just a big universe with lots of different pockets. So there's a finite universe with lots of different things going on. And each one of those still matters. Okay, so all of that out of the way, basically my starting presumption is that when we look at this trailer, we're clearly seeing something that was developed for gameplay reasons. It wasn't developed because someone wanted to explore something about the story. It's not developed to be an extension to Elden Ring story. However, I think there's two interesting things. So one is that Miyazaki was still involved in the concept stage, and I don't believe that Miyazaki would. I just have a suspicion that he would want to kind of make this fit. Now, it doesn't have to fit in the sense of like, we're literally going to have like, okay, we see the Nameless King. Could the Nameless King appear in the Elden Ring, universe that we explore in the game, in Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erd Tree? No, I don't think so. But if you sort of extend that out and you go sort of, well, there's a larger sort of picture here. There's a larger multiverse kind of thing going on. I lean towards thinking this is part of that. So is it canonical? I would say no and yes. The other thing that I found interesting is the fact that Ishizaki said that basically it's a separate and parallel to the world of Elden Rings. after the events of the Shattering. And, the Elden Ring is like this fundamental thing that governs reality. And if you break that apart, could you have different timelines? Could you have different universes, different dimensions, different things that could not maybe interact, but different versions of reality? I mean, I've kind of argued in the past that there is something like that happening in the base game of Elden Ring, right? What you see with Everjails, what you see with Farum Azula, the idea that there is some kind of fracturing of reality itself is something that, well, I've certainly proposed it in the past. Other people have talked about it in the past before ever seeing anything about Nightreign. So if you extend that idea out further, could we not just have some other fragment of reality, something which some little thread that goes in a different direction? So we'll have to wait and see, I think, to know exactly how canonical it is. I should say that, like, Ishizaki, he's emphasizing the separation between this and Elden Ring. However, he also doesn't say, like, no, this is not. He doesn't outright say this is not, part of the Elden Ring universe. This is he sort of puts it in a way which I think is deliberately leaving things a little bit open to speculation, because that is the FromSoft style. It is to make you unsure and to kind of get you to theorize on your own. So I think at this point, if you want to think, no, this is totally separate, it has nothing to do with the base game of Elden Ring, go ahead. Personally, I think, in the way that I've explained with the multiverse kind of concept, that I think that this is something which is sort of canonical in the larger sense, but exactly how that intersects with the base game may be less meaningful. Now, the other thing I should say is that Ishizaki is probably one of the few people in the world that knows most or all of the story of Elden Ring. So if he's directing this game, and we also don't know if there's, like, a narrative lead or something like this that's dealing with that aspect. With Miyazaki in part of the concept phase, I think even if this is totally separate and it has no, nobody, we don't want to connect it to the base game at all, I think what we'll see is there will be certain concepts, certain ideas that may inform the base game of Elden Ring. Even if we don't treat this as canon, I think it's like, in the same way that, we can look at previous FromSoft games and kind of look at how certain tropes are handled, certain concepts, certain archetypes, certain character types, and we can see how those are handled and kind of inform us about how that is done in Elden Ring. I think we could still use this. So as you can see in the description for this video, I basically answered the question of, is Nightreign canon? No, and yes. That's my view. So I've been sort of reading your comments inside. I haven't responded to them because I just wanted to sort of get that out as all in one go. And then I want to go through this trailer relatively quickly, and then I have to go switch my laundry out because I'm on a timeline here. So let's go here. Can you all... Oh, whoops. Don't do that. Don't do that. Oh, stop. Jesus Christ. Why can't I just put this at the top? Okay. Can you see this perfectly well? Can't tell if that's cut off. It's a little bit cut off, isn't it? Let's go back to the mini player. Or not the mini player, with the default. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look. Can you double tap the top? I'm not sure what that means. Double tap the top. Double tap the top. We'll just go like this. I think this should work. So first of all, we have some shadows of basically some kind of Titan. I'm going to look at this trailer from the perspective of, let's treat this through the lens of Elden Ring, even if it's very far removed of it. So there's a few things we can notice. Obviously, we have something that looks very much like Limgrave. Of course, it's called Limvelt. We have the moon there, and based on its position, we should have an Erdtree, but we don't. Erdtree should be about there, and we don't. We have the sun. We have shadows of Titans, so that may be kind of interesting. There's some sort of church there. Then this may be all randomly generated. No, this looks more like, you know, a sort of fort that we'd find in Limgrave. It's not Stormvale, it's not Morn, but it's a similar type of, you know, what do you call it? Romanesque architecture, that kind of Norman style. We've got a rise over here. And here we have some kind of, you know, purple magic, which probably connects to this whole night idea. I would say already, you know, if these days take 10 minutes, which that seems really fast. I do want to double check that. This is a considerable amount to kind of explore and go around, and if there's a randomly generated aspect to this, that could be that could offer a lot of replay value in trying to kind of find every little thing. I believe there's randomly generated loot as well, so very different type of game. But let's go on. We've also got these sort of protrusions that look like almost mushroom-esque, like petrified wood. 15 minutes, so maybe it's 15 minutes, okay. And this has been referred to as the Night's Tide. So, and this seems to be the thing which is sort of, it's like the Fortnite collapsing map idea. So. And then we have rain. And I think this is basically the area outside of that playable area. So this is once the Night's Tide passes, we have this rain that's coming down. And that seems to be the collapsing map there. I hope the game has a better explanation for why Nameless King is there, aside from Night King just yoinked him and other stuff from other worlds. Well, it'll be interesting to see the, you know, there are all these tropes that have basically appeared in every Souls game. So the idea of, you know, from death comes power, because there's something sort of magical about something within people, the ability to perceive and understand the world, This is a magic that can be controlled and manipulated. Uh, this that sort of concept has been there the whole time. Um, One idea which you could argue has sort of been there as well is what was stated explicitly in Dark Souls 3, that light is time. And you could see the night as being something which maybe kind of transcends time or is outside of time. And you also have Farum Azula in Elden Ring, where it's always day and it's outside of time. Um, so you could probably draw some kind of parallel where, um, you know, if you kind of escape the normal natural cycle of things, the cycle of day and night, of light and dark, and all this kind of stuff, um, that being beyond time in some respect kind of gives you the opportunity to bridge the barrier between different dimensions, different aspects of reality, different worlds. Um, yes, the Dark Souls bosses do not. But on the way, by the way it was talked about, they are not just. They are not placeholders. They are not just asset flips. They are actually Dark Souls bosses that are making their way into here, and we'll see that in a moment. It seems faster paced. And now this is basically inspired by the Fortnite bus. So this is not something you can just do. This seems to be something that takes you to a it's pre-programmed essentially. You can't just fly around with this hawk. So these seem to be three of the eight sort of heroes that you can choose to play as. There's sent to be demon there, which, out of all the bosses to bring back, um, why that one? Why centipede demon? But one interesting thing about this is clearly like a new asset. This is not the original centipede demon because bringing in a 2011 model into Elden Ring, it would look terrible. So they went to the effort of designing a new version of centipede demon, which makes me feel like this isn't just that makes me think this is more canonical than maybe a lot of people want to think. So going to that effort, like the easy thing would be to just port in stuff from Dark Souls 3 and maybe it not look that great, but kind of passable for Elden Ring. But if you're going back to Dark Souls 1 and you're bringing in and you're making a whole new model with new animations, new FX, all of this stuff, like this is a from the ground up, or as near to it as possible. This is from scratch built, so uh, so we're just seeing some of the heroes fighting. Any Demon Souls bosses? Well, so here's the thing. Demon Souls and Bloodborne are Sony, right? So Demon Souls and Bloodborne were FromSoft partnered with Sony for those, whereas Dark Souls and Elden Ring were Bandai, and then Sekiro was Activision. So I am going to assume there are absolutely no references to Demon Souls, Bloodborne, or Sekiro because they just don't have the rights to do that. Which is kind of funny because for a long time people were going, "Oh man, what if there's a shared universe between Demon Souls and Bloodborne and Dark Souls and all this stuff?" And it's like we're kind of getting it, but not with those, not with those. And this definitely looks like the Firekeeper from Dark Souls 3, although with a different sort of cloak. And that's by the way new assets there, right? So where was that? These ruins here, that's new assets. That's not in the base game Elden Ring, so they were building part of this shared universe but constrained by the gods of DMCA. Yeah, exactly. And we've got some kind of clambering mechanic. And this is the Eternal City. So so, this is the sort of thing where I'm like, okay, maybe we're not in canon, maybe, but we could still like, I could explore all of this and could I find something? Could I find something that would give me some insight into what they were thinking about with the Nox and so on? So that's sort of where I'm at. I think at minimum we'll get some insight into some lore. At maximum, it's a crazy timey-wimey multiverse situation. That's sort of the range. And there we have Nameless King. And this looks almost... Now, it looks better, and I don't know how much of this is just the way it's rendered, because, Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne had this real problem with anti-aliasing, and whenever they had, like, fur and feathers, it looked really bad. And this looks pretty good, and I don't know if that's just the way it's being rendered. To me, this head looks slightly different. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is even though it looks one-to-one, Nameless King, I wouldn't be surprised if they actually remade the whole thing. Because it looks better. Or maybe used some of the previous parts, maybe used the model and added new textures, added some new effects, whatever, but it looks like a reworked version. And this I have no idea, because that definitely sounds like Morgott. We're just fighting a random omen here. Looks vaguely like Rao ruin type stuff here. These pillars. Looks like Rao ruins. If we get like Morgat or something, Margut, I would just, y'all thought I was crazy for God of Roy. Just you wait. Just you wait. Cool. And new boss. I mean, so this is the other thing is like, yes, they're flipping assets, but there's a lot of new stuff that is clearly, designed with the same level of care as in Elden Ring. Some of these may be, ideas that were scrapped for Elden Ring, and so you had some some designers for Elden Ring that they're working on this stuff, and then not all those ideas make it in there. And then it's like, oh hey, uh, Ishizaki, why don't you just like get all that stuff that we didn't use, which again could be insight into Elden Ring. This guy looks amazing. I love this dude. And it kind of looks Basilisk adjacent. Um, if we got more lore about like Godwyn and dude, if this is Godwyn, oh, it's gonna be chaos. I love it. If this is a parallel world, none of the lore is gonna connect to it. Are you sure about that? Are you sure? I honestly, here's my general view is I think everybody's going to be arguing about whether how canonical this is, and I think that is the point. It what the most FromSoft thing that they could do is to do something where everybody is theorizing all the time, right? Where everybody's trying to guess and figure out what's going on. They're not going to tell us that this is canon or not. They're gonna make us argue and try to figure it out and come to a consensus because that is what they do. That's what it's going to be. We're not going to know. Uh, Interesting sigil. Almost reminds me of the Demon Souls markings in the Nexus, but it's not an Erdtree sigil. No, it's something that doesn't appear in Elden Ring. You can maybe see some variant of it here on his hands. So it's like multiple rings. So you need multiple rings to represent multiple worlds. Thank you, PB. In my opinion, the lore will be canon, but the plot will not. Yeah, I think it just depends on what you mean by canon. I mean, if you say like you write a story and then you go, well, look, at this point in time, another timeline was created where nothing else that happened after this is related to the first story. Is that canon? I I don't know. It just depends on how you see it, I think. But I am, I mean, one thing which makes me very hopeful is just seeing all these new, very new designs. This guy just looks epic. I love this dude already. Got some sort of like Cerberus three-headed dragon thing. And here we have, it's like the sun is setting. Almost similar to the sort of, so the sunset is kind of reminiscent of the Elden Beast fight, but otherwise I would say this is very reminiscent of Gale's fight. This sort of, clearly this is all ash here. I don't think this is sand because you have sort of things covered, branches of trees coming out. So this is like some kind of end of time, beyond anything else, magical place. And this is perhaps the most interesting. So we do see a kind of Erd tree style thing up in the top left. And this is probably, I would guess, what happens if you survive the 3 nights. You go in here and fight the final boss. What this is, clearly someplace like beyond anything else. With the spectral bit of the tree there, and then this background of like, we're in some cosmic place. This reminds me a lot of Attack on Titan. And if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of parallels to Elden Ring there. I don't think it's the Erdtree door. No, it looks very different. The Throne of Want from DS2, it looks more similar to that, actually. The stone is petrified bark. Yeah, this seems to be the sort of thing that I pointed out in the Limfelt region. There's this sort of petrified bark everywhere. Not Attack on Titan, please, no. I wasn't as disappointed with the ending as many people were, but we'll see. Great. So Nightreign coming 2025. There's a network test in January, I believe, which probably means we're due for a release date in, I don't know, June, something like that, probably summer. So yeah, this is where we are. This is where we are, guys. So what does this mean for lore theorizing about the base game? Well, at this point, I think basically nothing. We still go on with our normal theories. Maybe it gives everyone a bit more room to maneuver with supposing multiple timelines, multiple parallel worlds, and all this sort of stuff. You could argue that. I should point out that there already are things that people have mostly dismissed, like, for example, other players getting the Elden Ring, becoming Elden Lord in other worlds. This is something which most people have just gone, oh, yeah, forget about that. That's, we want to dismiss that. That's not really, canonical. Like, that's just weird gameplay stuff. But maybe not. Maybe not. What I would say is I don't think we're due. I feel pretty confident that we're not going to get anything like the Glowmide Queen is Velka. I don't think we're going to get, Radigan is actually Gwyn's soul or anything that's like a direct connection. I don't think that's going to be it. So there is probably a subtle and interesting way you could do something like that, but I doubt that it's going in that direction. I feel like it's just going to be pretty separate. But I still think at this point that I'm going with sort of canonical in the broadest way possible. Part of the same multiverse, maybe not the same sort of universe, dimension, whatever. So, you should work for From because you've made me rather interested in this now. And I should reiterate, you should be suspicious of everything I say because it's obviously in my interest for this game to be interesting to talk about. So if I'm convincing you that this is going to be really important to talk about, then you should be suspicious of what I'm saying. But at least for now, I am intrigued, and this is giving me extra energy to put into my most frenzied theories. So I think I will leave it there. I have to go switch out my laundry and go do normal human things. But thank you all for joining me. And I hope this helps assuage some fears, perhaps. I, for one, will be basing all of my lore interpretation exclusively on Nightreign content. Yes. Honestly, I think the funniest thing is going to be that everybody's going to be thinking about, everybody's going to be arguing about this, and even when the game comes out, I don't think it's going to be obvious, which is par for the course for FromSoft. That is going to be the funniest part of it. And all the people who are, everybody's going to be disappointed, because all the people who want there to be something to it will not get confirmation of that, and all the people who don't want there to be something to it will kind of get a lot of evidence that there is something to it. So it's going to be chaos. It's going to be beautiful. I'm going to enjoy it all, and I'm glad you guys could join me for this time. Okay, everyone, take care. I will talk to you all later.